It's about 20 after 7, and I am walking out to the Trimbleplex. I wanted to be there for 8:30. I wanted to catch the 8 o'clock bus, so I'm going to be about a half hour late. It's not such a big deal. I'm saying I hope not. Unless the band I wanted to see plays first. I doubt that'll happen. I didn't get any laundry done today, but I did take a shower, which was necessary. I wasn't going anywhere today without taking a shower. It was a little overdue, so I was done anyways. So yeah. Walking into the bank machine, got to stop at the liquor store, and then hit the bus. If the 7:30 bus happens to be late or something, I might catch it at 7:45. But otherwise, I'm going for the 8 o'clock bus. Tonight's not going to be late either. I may even catch the midnight bus out. Depends what time we'll play at and stuff, right? So we'll find out. So I should point out that the hipster thing tonight is a singer-songwriter by the name of Courtney Barnett. I'm not 22 years old. It's just not. It's just not my age group kind of thing, right? I'm not a millennial. I don't really like that kind of millennial indie music. On top of that, well, I wouldn't say on top of that. I would say to elaborate upon that, it's like folk music in the sense that it's not exactly folk music. It's like electric folk or something, but it appeals to the same group of people that folk music is going to appeal to. You'll notice I don't go to folk shows because I'm just not a fan of folk music. I don't find much compelling or exciting about going to a concert and watching somebody recite a story. And that is a generational gap. I know that people in the generation after me, the generation younger than me, they do. It's a popular thing, right? It's a big thing. It didn't come out of nowhere, right? It came from. It's a retro thing, right? It was popular in the 60s, and it's a part of the so-called counterculture. And it's the same thing nowadays, right? It's having counterculture about it. It's packaged and sold to you like everything else, right? But it was like I remember in the 90s, this kind of thing was there. But it was not at all. Not at all what I was interested in. The closest I'd get to something like that are some of the. I wouldn't even describe that way. So it's just it's nowhere near my spectrum. I like noisy rock music, angular prog, that kind of thing. I'm not at all interested in some singer-songwriter that wants to play a couple of simple chords and tell me a story, right? So, if there was something more musically interesting to it, I don't want to fall into tropes like this. It's kind of sexist, but I don't if you were to back in the 80s, you had a lot of stuff like Kate Bush, for example, which was there was an abstract storytelling aspect to it, but it was also quite musically interesting. I need the musical component. If I don't have the musical aspect, I can't get into it, right? So, and that's the point of it, though, from their perspective, is they want the arrangements to be very minimal so that people aren't focusing on the music. They're focusing more on the lyrical component, which I'm just, you know. I guess the difference between me and a lot of people is that I don't pretend that I'm into it. I grew up in a period where most of the, you know, underground music was an instrumental, in fact. Right, so, and that's kind of the, like, that's my generational crux, is symphonic post-rock, right? So, not you know, neo-hippie storytelling stuff. So, it's not, it's happening. That's where all the cool kids are. I'm not a cool kid, never was, never wanted to be. I'm going to hang out with the losers at the indie rock show, the real indie rock show, not the quote unquote indie rock show. Yeah, there's the 7:30 bus right there. Just walked by it on its way into the tunnel. It's fine. I mean, I should point out, I mean, unless you're living under a rock, you realize that Courtney Barnett is actually very critically acclaimed in what she does, right? So I mean, I'm trying not to like come down on it or something. Well, first of all, you gotta realize that it's very critically acclaimed amongst older people, right? She's like an older critic's darling, but it's like this weird kind of like generational skip, right? Kind of young Xers old Xers or young boomers kind of skipping over to a millennial thing, right? So it's just not. It's the kind of thing that you can enjoy with your grandma, if you want to. Maybe a decent comparison is Joni Mitchell. You know, like it's just not my thing. But it is certainly acclaimed though. So, like I said, it's where the cool kids are, but I'm not a cool kid, so it's not where I'm going. So it's about 25 after 8, and it seems like I'm stuck on the bus for an indefinite period of time because, get this, there's nobody working at the border crossing. There are no cops there, it's empty. Apparently, the United States can't afford to staff its border. Maybe they might want to revisit this thing called taxes. I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work out. There's a point where, I mean, I wanted to get there for 8:30. Looks like, I want to get there for 9, but if I can't get there, then I'm just going to have to go home. So, we'll see how this works out, but hopefully I get through soon. Like I say, I am actually, honestly, sitting on a bus at Borders, waiting for cops to show up at the crossing. There we go. I'm not late, right? It's about, well, the bus got me here about 10 minutes later, so I should still get there very close to 9, which was the amended plan. I think I'm more pissed that the air conditioner was on in the bus and it's sitting cold for half an hour, and so now I'm cold because I had to sit in there for half an hour. But no harm done ultimately. But yeah, the like a good half an hour there was nobody there, and the answer the bus driver got out of them was that they were short-staffed, believe it or not. So I don't know, maybe there's some logic to the idea that a little bit more funds for the border, and this is on the Canadian side, you know. Anyways, I'm walking. Okay, so I'm walking home, and I have to admit that I got a little turned around about the band I went to see. I didn't think it was actually them, but then they put a few things that sound familiar, and I was like, oh. And then I thought maybe they were the same band as the other band, because they were like billing themselves strangely. It was a confusing and harrowing experience, and I can only well, I mean, at least I couldn't. I got turned around. I wasn't sure if it was the band I went to see or not. So they threw me, so I didn't get any footage because I didn't know what I was watching. Which is actually indication that it was a good set. Because I'm like that, right? Hey, they turned me around, man. They confused me enough that I didn't get footage. It's a good set. I had no idea what I was watching, but I mean, then they would do like little teases of stuff that I heard on their Bandcamp site. The drummer has some kind of Phil Collins fetish, which is nice to hear actually, but still a little. Actually, I think it's becoming less out of place. I think old Phil is finally taking his place as the drum god. You know, no, it's true. A bit of a lag there, but he's actually got a pretty big footprint at this point, I think. Anyways, there was that going on, but I mean, there was no hint of that in the Bandcamp that I heard. Although I only heard the newest record. They also did a lot of like obviously satirical emo moaning, and like I didn't pick that up from the site either. So they threw me for a loop. I wasn't sure it was them until the very end, kind of thing, and so I didn't get any footage. So I mean, you can put it down on the list as a question mark. I'm going to put this away. I do appear to have caught the 12 o'clock bus. That's nice. Yeah, I know, but I still don't want any spaghetti quite yet. So I've pointed out a few times over the last couple of months that this election is going to definitely pull some party or pull another candidate on the left. Clinton is not going to be able to pick up much of the Sanders support. See, this is another reason why why this is stupid, right? I mean, Sanders is actually fairly popular amongst Clinton supporters, who largely actually agree with Sanders, but they're attached to their candidate, right? I know the media wants to present it the other way, that Sanders supporters really secretly agree more with Clinton. It's actually the other way around, and the polling is very clear on that Clinton supporters really secretly prefer Sanders. I want to make sure I said that right, because I have a habit of mangling up my language here. What I'm saying is that the data is very clear that Clinton supporters secretly support Sanders, but they have all of these sort of hang-ups that are being pushed onto them by the media, right? Stuff like Sanders is unelectable, or Clinton is more realistic, all these sorts of things, and they fall for it, right? Because they're the kind of people that are easily conditioned, right? What that means is that if Sanders did get the nomination, Clinton's supporters would go over almost entirely. The Democrats would lose nothing by running Sanders over Clinton, right? In terms of support. But the opposite is not true. The Sanders supporters don't support Clinton, and there's a lot of very obvious disagreements on foreign policy, stuff like healthcare. It's there's a lot of reasons why if you are a Sanders supporter, you'd never support Clinton, right? And that's going to happen, right? It's just that the kerfuffle is still in play, so you haven't seen the shuffle out yet. I mused about some things on the other side. I'm actually not convinced that the right-wing independent party, this independent conservative party that people like Bill Kristol have been talking about, I'm not convinced that that's actually going to take off. And the reason is that I think that in the end Trump will conform to being their candidate. He will become the mainstream Republican candidate. He'll pick up every establishment position. He's got a few months for people to forget things. And in the end, there won't be any difference between Trump and Romney, and or between Trump and Bush, right? These differences that he presented as a way to win the primary are going to disappear one by one over the next couple of months, right? So he'll fall in line with trade. He'll step back from the Muslim thing, and et cetera, right? Which is going to remove a lot of the issues, right? But is Clinton going to adopt universal health care? Is she going to renounce violence? These things aren't about to happen anytime soon, right? I'm not suggesting that Sanders is Jesus or something. Like he's going to fight his wars, but he's a lot less enthusiastic about it. Clinton's I've been pushing this point hard, but I didn't make it up. The actual reality, the simple truth is that Clinton is a Class A warmonger. So, you can't get Sanders supporters to follow Clinton. It's never going to happen. But I think that you will eventually get these conservatives that are flipping out. You will get them behind Trump, because Trump will, in the end, just be another. He's trying to present himself as a new Reagan, and I think in the end that'll probably work. It might not work with the center, and he may end up losing, but I think that he'll hold his base. Okay, so there's this Young Turks report here saying that the libertarians are polling very high, and he's suggesting a few things here. One of the things that he wants to suggest is that the media should take note of this as a phenomena. But it's actually a really disappointing thing to hear from a pundit that styles himself as a media analyst. Of course, the media is not going to take note of the unrest and report it as it is. So the media exists to stamp people like Gary Johnson out. Right, so there's a real potential for a moment of clarity there when you realize that, wait a second, the media isn't covering this as a real. Well, of course it's not. It's the reason the media is being so dismissive of it is because it knows it's a phenomena. It wouldn't mention it at all if it didn't think it was. If it was in a normal year, you wouldn't even hear his name on TV, right? But because you see that he's picking up some, decent polling numbers, that's when the media, steps in and then goes into attack mode, right? Obviously, it's the same thing on the right as it is on the left, right? Because there isn't really a right and a left. There's an establishment and everybody else, right? And the establishment doesn't care. Goes after Sanders the same way it would go after the KKK, right? It doesn't distinguish. It's not about their ideas or their policies. It's about whether you uphold power or not, right? There's a bipartisan consensus, a Washington establishment, a Washington consensus, whatever you want to call it, and then there's everybody else, right? But I think a bigger mistake he's making is he's suggesting people are just they look at the ballot and they see, or they look at the poll and they see, Trump, Clinton, and then this other guy. And so then they vote for the other guy because it's not Trump or Clinton. It's really, really condescending. And I think it's a huge mistake to assume that. I think that the rise of Gary Johnson, even if it's temporary, is entirely rational. It's very easy to understand. Okay, if you're the pro-market type of conservative that the Republicans have been nurturing for decades, Donald Trump is basically sainted. Okay, it's the Republican Party has gone crazy, right? He doesn't even support free trade, right? So it's a non-option for the economic wing of the Republican Party, which is one of two major wings, right? You've got the social conservatives, and then you've got the economic liberals, right? And that's what they are, as liberals. Call themselves libertarians, but I mean, it's a big part of what the Republican Party is. They think they're conservative. They're not conservatives, okay? They're actually liberals. It's just the language is very confused in the United States. It's we're on the other side of 1984, so everything's backwards now. But if you ask around, you'll very easily find all of these people that are desperately seeking for a real conservative. Like, go to their message boards, read what they're saying. Who is the real conservative? And I can understand this because something similar happened in Canada, okay? So this is a bit of a long time ago now. But back in 1993, the Conservative Party collapsed. They were calling themselves the Progressive Conservative Party at the time. It was out of a merger of the Progressive Party in the West with the Conservatives. Progressive Party here used in he wasn't even as quote unquote progressive as Teddy Roosevelt, but it's amazing how people forget that Theodore Roosevelt was a Republican and that there was a very strong conservative streak in the progressive movement, right? Anyways, in fact, it's still there, right? When you hear all these, SJWs talking about safe spaces and stuff, there's nothing left-wing about that. It's the most right-wing conservative nonsense you could come up with, right? So, but I mean, it's attached to progressivism, quote unquote, because that streak was always there. Teddy Roosevelt was a conservative. He ran for the Conservative Party, but he called himself a progressive, right? And so that's where this progressive conservative thing comes from, something sort of like that. And they were the mainstream right-wing party in Canada from, I guess it was sometime in the 30s up until 1993 when they were decimated. The reason was because they brought in a tax. But there's other reasons, right? NAFTA was unpopular, and et cetera, et cetera. But the big thing that everybody agrees with is that it was the tax. A consumption tax called the General Service Tax. Or there's the Goods and Services Tax. I don't know, the GST. It's just, it was kind of big. I think it was what? It was 7% on everything at a point of sale. So every time you bought something, well, not everything, food was exempt, but most goods that you bought were 8%, and it was designed to pay off the debt vultures as a consequence of not dealing with interest rates. We don't need to get into this. But what ended up happening when the Conservative Party collapsed in 1993 was that it split into two factions. Okay, it fit into something called the Reform Party, which was huge out west, and then the remnants of the Progressive Conservative Party carried on in Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces. But the Reform Party became very it was the Reform Party itself was based on this previous movement that existed in the Western provinces called Social Credit. It was not particularly. I mean, social credit is complicated because it's not based on like liberal economics, or it wasn't initially. It was this weird social economic theory. But the Social Credit Party, by the second guy that took over, by 1960 anyways. Earlier than that, no doubt. This is local Western Canadian history. But don't ask me for dates on too many things. But by the 60s, anyways, and like I said before that, probably more like the 40s, this social credit idea, which was based on the idea of a dividend, right? Everybody should get a check, had converted itself into a Christian party, and that's really the basis of its support. Was that it was a very right-wing Christian party. Some of the things that they did, for example, was they euthanized mentally ill people. Really Christian, huh? But that's the extreme right. So we're talking about a party that flirted with fascism at the federal level, had known connections to neo-Nazis, but eventually in the West saw itself convert itself into the mainstream conservative party. And it lasted for a little while. It was eventually kicked out of power in Alberta by the Conservative Party, the Progressive Conservatives. Okay, but the core of it, the guy that's associated with it most is Ernest Manning. His son became Preston Manning, and it was Preston Manning that ran the Reform Party, right? So I mean, it's actually a really direct connection, and it picked up on ideas that were well to the right of the Conservative Party in Canada, right? So, for example, the Federal Progressive Conservative Party in the 80s refused to write a law that criminalized abortion. It was struck down by the Supreme Court, and the Conservative Party refused to write a law that criminalized it, which you can imagine upset a lot of right-wing Christians, mostly in the western provinces. You didn't really get a movement in the East. It didn't happen. That kind of conservatism is historical. I mean, there was a time, a long time ago, when we had it here, but it's historical in the East. Nobody out East thinks like that. Or small pockets of rural people. And that's really the big difference, right? Is the East is dominated by urban centers, and the West is very rural, right? That's the real difference, right? And as the West becomes more urbanized, people lose their memories of living in a rural culture. It will become more like the East, right? Everybody knows that. But for the meantime, that's what developed, right? And then over the course of the 90s and into the 2000s, these two parties came back together again, but it was in such a way that the Reform Party, that is the party that was based on social credit, very right-wing social ideas, right-wing Christian ideas, the religious right, the Canadian version of it, which is a little more timid, but it's still the religious right, became ascendant in the party, and the Progressive Conservatives became the junior partner in it, right? So when they ended up eventually winning an election in 2006, it was no longer the Progressive Conservative Party that developed with the combination of the old Tories with the progressives, the right-wing progressives. It was no longer that. Instead, it was the right-wing Western Christian Party, which, as you can imagine, disenfranchised a lot of people that had been voting Progressive Conservative for, at that point, most of their lives. And the refrain that opened up was real conservatism, in quotes. Never with capitals, but perhaps should have been, right? And how you defined real conservatism depended on what side of the divide you were on. If you were an Eastern Tory, you defined real conservatives as of the PC variety, and you saw the Reform Party as a bunch of crackpot extremists. In their view, real conservatism had, respect for, limited government, which meant that, you kept government out of people's lives. So you didn't pass laws opposing abortion. You didn't get upset about gay marriage because you believed in small government and you believed in keeping government out of people's lives, right? Whereas if you were on the Reform Party side of thing, the real conservative was somebody that had adhered to these Christian kinds of values. right? So you ended up with the kind of like the Tocqueville conservatives that want bills of rights and all these kinds of things, fighting against the populist conservatives that just want to push the Bible down everybody's throat. What was real conservatism? Well, I don't think that they ever figured it out. I think they're still arguing about that, to be honest with you. Okay? There's a convention in their party coming up in the next little bit, and they're still bitching about it. It's not clear. Okay? You've got younger MPs claiming, younger MPs from out west claiming that they can't be in a party that opposes abortion. You've got the old guard claiming to walk if they don't get the right kind of language. It's divisive, and it has to be, right? It's, in many ways, a party that is a relic of the past, trying to modernize itself, right? But what I'm trying to get across is that an idea of people looking for something that holds its values is something that you should expect from the right. Now, that's not the entire Republican base, of course. A lot of people that vote Republican that can't spell conservative, let alone define it, right? But there's certainly a substantial part of the base that are rooted in specific values and that expect that the nominee of their party will reflect those values, which Trump is not doing. Okay, now, I know that this kind of breaks the narrative on the left too, right? Trump is just another crazy Republican, right? Well, he's not. In fact, he kind of sounds more like a Democrat most of the time. They don't even know if he's opposed to abortion, and I think most of the evidence suggests that he's probably not. He doesn't support free trade, and it doesn't seem like he does. Right? And that's actually both sides of it, right? In Canada, it was basically a fight between social conservatives and fiscal conservatives, or traditional conservatives. Trump is neither a traditional conservative nor is he a social conservative. So they got both of them going after him, right? He's a political opportunist, right? So this idea that there's a base on the right that's reacting terribly. I mean, like, how can you not? Like, how could it be less obvious that that's based on something that's real, right? So this idea that people are just looking at it and they're just picking the other option it's horribly dismissive. It's and again, from somebody that's supposed to be media savvy, it's very disappointing, right? I should be clear that I've never been a big fan of this network or anything. It's just the only. I found myself unable to find really any decent coverage of Bernie Sanders anywhere else. So as we're getting out of this, I'm not going to be following the Young Turks in the future very much. I'm really not a fan. I think that I think that they would actually probably be more at home supporting a libertarian party. It kind of sounds more like it's they're or actually, you know what I think the actual truth is that I think that the network would be probably most at home covering a progressive conservative, right? Because in the sense that they're progressives, they're progressives in the mold of a Teddy Roosevelt, which is on the right, right? In any normal country, that would be considered right wing, including the United States 100 years ago, right? But they're stuck in this position where they're disenfranchised because, like a lot of Americans are, they don't really see an option they can identify with, and so they're trying to make sense of something, right? They know that they're not imperialists, so they can't support the Republicans, only to be met with an imperialist running with the Democrats, and now they're getting confused, and I think that they would fit in fairly well, actually, with the old Tory progressive conservative media in Canada. kind of more another term to use is educated conservatives. I think that that term describes both Anna and Schenck very well. Anyways, if you are the pro-market type of conservative that the Republicans have been nurturing and building for the last several decades, Donald Trump is basically Satan to you. You can't support this. It's a non-option for the entire economic wing. The better question to ask is, how big is the economic wing of the Republican Party? That was another thing that came up. When the Reform Party and the Conservative Party merged, or the Reform Party and the Progressive Conservative Party merged into the Conservative Party, the last progressive conservative prime minister refused to endorse Stephen Harper. His name was Joe Clark. Well, it wasn't the last. He was the last leader. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. Was the last leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. His name was Joe Clark. That's not actually true either. He was the second last. The actual leader merged them, even though he promised not to. It's going to complicate here, but his name was Joe Clark. He was very popular amongst progressive conservatives. He was prime minister for a short amount of time in 1979, and he had a number of cabinet roles in the Brian Mulroney government in the late 80s and very early 90s, and he refused to do it. So what you ended up seeing happening was that there was this cleavage of support that moved over, and all of a sudden you could actually meaningfully quantify what had been abstractly thrown around as this idea of red Tory in Canada, which is conservatives that might lean towards the Liberals. And you can see it happen overnight. We realized that, okay, how big is the red Tory vote in Canada? It's about 6 to 8%. And it's still there, and it's still roughly the same size. And if you're paying attention and you're smart, you can analyze Canadian politics by pulling out this red Tory vote, which was quantified during the sort of Joe Clark, Stephen Harper feud around 2004-ish. What you're doing here is you're learning just how big the economic wing of the Republican Party is. Right now it looks like it's around 10%. Right? So, I mean, you hear this sort of rhetoric from all these Republicans, your Paul Ryans, and, it's all about the debt and, low taxes and all that kind of thing. But, I mean, you know that, large swaths of the Republican voting base are very poor working class people. They obviously, I mean, that rhetoric doesn't really represent them, right? All the poor white working class people that vote for the Republicans. Why are they voting for them? Well, racism and all these other sorts of things. But that still leaves open the question, how big is the actual economic wing of the Republican Party? And we're measuring it. You should take note of that, because it may be useful to you in the future. Right now, it looks like it's around 10%. We'll see if that can grow a little or come down a bit. How can Gary Johnson increase his vote share? Well, he's certainly not going to be more appealing than Donald Trump for the nationalists, right? For the racists, for all these people that make up the bulk of the Republican Party, right? And it's hard to see how Gary Johnson is going to pick up the religious vote either, or the neoconservative vote. So it's something very specific. Well, I guess it's the neoliberal vote, right? When I say neoconservative, I guess that mostly means foreign policy nowadays. The liberal interventionism kind of thing, right? Strong, or you can just call them imperialists, right? But neoliberalism is the economic, and that's what the libertarians represent. How big is it? We know that now, right? Because the Republicans have thrown that away, and this is what we got. Okay, so you're looking around 10% right now. And that's what they are. They're people that are desperately seeking real conservatives, quote unquote. And what they're coming out with is the libertarians. Now, as I stated at the beginning, I don't think that's going to last. I think that caving on the left is more stable because Hillary Clinton will never appeal to those voters. Everybody knows who Hillary Clinton is. Everybody knows what she stands for. Everybody knows that she's not going to do any of these things that she's claiming. It doesn't matter what she says; she'll never swing them, right? But Donald Trump, if he says the right things, and he stands in the right places and puts his hand in the right place and all these sorts of things, I think he can get these kids back. Or I said kids. I don't know why I said kids. I think he can get these voters back. I think that this is sort of a temporary reaction of disgust that the Republicans would pick this person, and that as Trump begins to sound more and more like a conventional Republican, in fact, begins to sound more and more like Ronald Reagan, you're going to see those people come back. And I think that the more the election becomes about foreign policy, which is, it looks like that's what Hillary wants to run on, the more that's going to bring them back too, right? Because you're going to see these big contrasts in ways that are going to make Trump far more appealing to independents on both sides, but especially the right-leaning libertarians, right? So I don't think it's an accident. I think that there's a lot of intent behind what you're seeing here, but I do think it's a blip. We will see support come up with third parties on the left, but unless I mean, there's always a possibility Trump could fuck everything up, right? I don't think that's likely. I think that he's going to stick to the establishment script, and he's going to pull them back. So it's not some kind of fluke. It's legit, but in the end it'll be a blip.